Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are opening up the textbook to a section that, well, a lot of nursing students and honestly working nurses too might be tempted to skim
Oh,
over.
absolutely.
But we're here to tell you don't skip this one. It is effectively the operating system for everything else you do in healthcare.
It really is. We are looking at policy, politics, legislation, and community health nursing. This is Chapter 10 of Community Public Health Nursing, 7th edition, written by Kathy R. Arvidsson.
And our goal today is to act as your study companion. We know this chapter is dense with dates and laws and definitions.
That was so dense.
So we're going to walk through it in the exact order it's written. We'll decode the government structures, the major legislative milestones, and really the how-to guide for nursing advocacy that Arvidsson lays out.
The core argument the text makes right from the start is that you just cannot separate clinical care from political action. If you don't understand how the rules are made, you're limited in how well you can advocate for your patient. So this isn't just a civics lesson. It's a nursing intervention.
Let's get right into it then. Section 1, which provides the historical foundation. The chapter kind of challenges this modern idea that political activism is some new thing for nurses.
Right. There's this misconception that nursing started as, pure bedside charity and only recently got political. But the text offers a timeline of key historical figures that proves the exact opposite.
So the founders of the profession.
They were political operators first, caregivers second. It's fascinating.
The first name the text highlights is, of course, Florence Nightingale. But it frames her differently than the usual lady with the lamp story.
Totally. It frames her as a data scientist and a lobbyist. During the Crimean War, she didn't just bandage wounds. She collected statistics. She used mortality data.
Data, wow.
Yeah, to prove that sanitary conditions, not just combat injuries, were killing soldiers. And then, crucially, she used those numbers to exert political pressure on the British government to change military health policy.
So that sets the standard right there. Policy change based on data.
Exactly. The next figure mentioned is Sojourner Truth. Most students know her for abolition and women's rights, but the text specifically highlights her role in nursing policy.
Which was what?
She was an advocate for federal funding. She lobbied Congress specifically for funds to train nurses and physicians. She understood really early on that you can't build a healthcare workforce without a budget, and budgets are political.
That makes sense.
Oh.
Then we have Clara Barton. Everyone associates her with the Red Cross, but the text points out the massive political lift that was required to make that happen.
It wasn't just about organizing volunteers on a battlefield. She had to persuade Congress to ratify the Treaty of Geneva.
An international treaty.
An international treaty. By doing that, she ensured the Red Cross could operate in peacetimes, not just during war. That is high-level diplomacy.
The list continues with Lavinia Dock. She was a suffragist, a writer, but her specific contribution was about control.
Autonomy. She campaigned for nurses to control their own profession rather than being, subordinates to physicians.
Yeah.
And she linked that directly to the right to vote. She knew that without the vote, nurses had no leverage to demand that autonomy.
And then there's Lillian Wald, who is basically the mother of public health nursing.
And a major political force. She connected health to social conditions like housing and poverty. The text notes she was the driving force behind the creation of the Children's Bureau in 1912.
The Children's Bureau, okay.
And she was frequently at the White House helping shape national policy.
The chapter also lists Mary Breckinridge, who established the Frontier Nursing Service in rural Kentucky, and then Susie Walking Bear Yellowtail.
Susie Walking Bear Yellowtail is such a crucial figure. She was a Native American nurse who literally walked from reservation to reservation to improve health services.
Wow.
And she eventually established the Native American Nurses Association, making sure that indigenous health issues had a specific voice in policy.
And to round out the historical section, the text mentions Florence Wald,
who brought the hospice movement to the U.S. in the 70s.
and Dr. Ruth Watson Lubick.
Yeah, who crusaded for freestanding birth centers to combat infant mortality.
The takeaway here, it seems like what Arvidsson wants students to get, is that if you think nursing is just clinical skills, you're ignoring half your heritage.
Exactly. These women were change makers in the halls of power.
Okay, so to follow in their footsteps, you have to speak the language. Section 2 of the chapter breaks down some core definitions.
Yes.
And these are terms that get used interchangeably, but for the exam and for practice, you really need to know the difference.
Let's clarify them. First, policy. The text defined policy simply as a course of action to obtain a desired effect.
So it's the plan.
It's the plan.
That's it.
Then there's public policy. That's societal. It's the standards formed by government that concern the general public, like a law preventing the sale of tobacco to minors. That's public policy.
And health policy.
That's a subset of that. It refers to decisions about goals in healthcare, a decision to fund an immunization program, for instance,
The text also defines nursing policy.
which is nursing leadership influencing practice. That's more internal within our profession.
And finally, a big one, PAPE or Political Action Committee.
A PAIC is a fundraising group tied to an organization. See, organizations can't just hand money to candidates directly, so they form a PAIC to raise money from members and financially support political causes.
This section also introduces a major paradigm shift in how we define health itself. And this is really the foundation of modern public health.
Historically, the medical model defined health as just the absence of infectious disease. If you didn't have cholera, you were healthy.
Right.
But the text points to the World Health Organization's definition, which shifted that to a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being.
Which moves healthcare from being a commodity, something you buy, to a human right.
Exactly. And that philosophy underpins government initiatives like Healthy People 2020. The text lists 4 overarching goals for that initiative: high-quality, longer lives, health equity, social and physical environments that promote health, and quality of life across all life stages.
And to achieve those goals, the text lists the 10 essential public health services. We won't list all 10, but they're all action verbs. Monitor health status, diagnose hazards.
Inform the public, mobilize partnerships, enforce laws. It's basically the government's job description for public health.
Speaking of government, Section 3 covers the structure of the U.S. government.
Back to high school civics, but with a nursing lens.
Right, and it starts with the separation of powers, the three-legged stool.
You have the legislative branch, which enacts statutory laws. That's Congress.
Okay.
The executive branch, which administers and enforces laws. That's the president, the governor, agencies like the CDC. And the judicial branch, which interprets laws.
But the concept that is most critical for you as a nursing student to grasp is federalism. Why does a nurse in New York have a different scope of practice than a nurse in Florida?
Because of the Constitution. Powers not specifically given to the federal government are reserved for the states. These are called state police powers.
Oh,
That's the term.
That's the term.
And that is why public health, law-like professional licensing, quarantine rules, school vaccinations, is largely a state issue.
The chapter also has a flowchart, figure 10.1, how a bill becomes a law. It looks like a maze.
It's designed to be difficult. I mean, the text walks you through the steps. A bill is drafted, it goes to a committee, then a subcommittee, then hearings markup where they edit it, then a floor debate, and finally a vote.
And because of bicameralism, it has to happen in both the House and the Senate.
Both. And even if it passes both, the president can veto it. And while Congress can override a veto with a 2/3 vote, that's really rare.
So the key insight here
It is much, much easier to defeat a bill than to pass one. The opposition always has the advantage.
Before we get to the specific laws, the text briefly distinguishes between public sector and private sector policy.
It really just comes down to motivation. Public sector policy is driven by social and political theories. Private sector policy, like from insurance companies or employers, is driven by economics and business management.
Okay, Section 5. This is the greatest hits timeline of major legislative actions. Table 10.3 in your text. We are going to go through these chronologically because they really build the system we work in today.
Let's start in 1906. The Pure Food and Drugs Act. This established the FDA.
Okay, FDA. Then 1935, the Social Security Act.
This was the bedrock. It provided welfare for high-risk mothers and children, and later expanded to include older adults and the handicapped. It set the precedent for the federal government getting involved in social welfare.
Next up, 1946, the Hill-Burton Act.
This was all about infrastructure. The government funded hospital construction, but with a catch.
There's always a catch.
Those hospitals had an obligation to care for the uninsured. It massively increased the number of hospital beds across the country.
Now we jump to 1965, the big one. The amendments to the Social Security Act that gave us Medicare and Medicaid. The text breaks these down by title, and it's crucial to keep them straight.
Okay, so Medicare is Title 818. It is a federal program. It generally covers people over 65, people with permanent disabilities, or those with end-stage renal disease, and it's funded by payroll taxes.
Okay. And Medicaid.
Medicaid is Title 19. It is a combined federal and state program for the poor and medically needy.
So states have a say.
States run it,
Yeah.
and they have to match federal dollars. And a crucial difference, the text notes, is that Medicaid covers long-term care-like nursing homes, while Medicare generally does not.
That is a huge distinction. Okay, moving on to 1970, we have OSHA.
The Occupational Safety and Health Act, all about worker safety in the workplace.
1985.
COBRA. This is vital for emergency care. It requires hospitals with ERs to treat anyone regardless of their ability to pay. It also lets you continue your insurance for a while after losing a job.
1996, HAPSC.
We all know this one for privacy, right? But the text emphasizes it also ensured portability of coverage.
And 1997, SCIE.
The State Children's Health Insurance Program. This was designed for that gap population children and families who earn too much for Medicaid but can't afford private insurance.
And finally, the Nurse Reinvestment Act of 2003.
A direct legislative response to the nursing shortage. It provided funding for nursing education, scholarships, retention grants, things like that.
That timeline really shows how the safety net was built piece by piece over decades. Now, Section 6, policy formulation, how these things actually get written. The text contrasts the ideal with the reality.
Yeah, ideally, it's a rational process. Define the issue, analyze the costs and benefits, choose the best solution. In reality, the text calls it conflict theory. It's a competition for dollars and attention among different interest groups.
But there is a specific part of this process where Arvidsson says nurses can really intervene. Regulation.
This is a huge light bulb moment in the chapter. Once a law passes Congress, it goes to administrative agencies like HHS to write the specific rules or regulations. And the text explains there is typically a 30-day window for public input.
So you don't have to be a senator to influence the law.
Not at all. The text emphasizes that nurses can submit comments during that window.
Yeah.
It is the most direct way to say, hey, this rule will hurt my patients, or this rule isn't practical at the bedside.
That leads perfectly into Section 7, the effective use of nurses. The text uses this great phrase, the power of one and many.
Right, because nurses are the largest health professional group, over 4 million strong.
4 million.
And we are consistently rated as the most trusted profession in ethics polls. The text argues that this is political capital that we often just let sit there unused.
It outlines several specific methods for using that capital. First up, coalitions.
Strength in numbers. The text gives the example of nurses for a healthier tomorrow, just groups joining together to maximize resources.
Then there is lobbying. And there is a sidebar, box 10.7, called the ABCs of lobbying.
It's so practical. It breaks it down. A is for appropriate information. B is for brief, be concise. C is for constructive. It really emphasizes that lobbying isn't some shady backroom deal. It's educating the legislator.
And be on time, listen, write a follow-up letter.
Basic professional courtesy, but in a political context.
We mentioned PACs earlier, but the text also lists campaigning and voting as key activities.
And it makes such a strong point here. If every single nurse voted based on health policy issues, the landscape would completely change.
And some take it a step further.
And hold office. The chapter highlights Sylvia Trent Adams, who was the first nurse to serve as acting surgeon general, and mentions the Congressional Nursing Caucus.
Finally, in Section 8, the chapter covers healthcare reform and leadership. It focuses heavily on the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, from 2010.
Yes, and the text details the specific provisions that you need to know. The ACA prohibits lifetime limits on coverage. It prohibits insurers from dropping your coverage just because you get sick. It requires coverage for pre-existing conditions.
That was a massive shift.
A huge shift. It also allows dependents to stay on their parents' insurance until age 26. And it mandates coverage for preventive care without copays.
And what about Medicaid expansion?
The text mentions that as a key part of the law, but also notes that the Supreme Court rules states could reject that expansion if they wanted to.
The section also touches on veterans' health.
Yes, specifically focusing on the goal of a seamless transition from the Department of Defense system to the VA system. And it highlights a major win for nursing autonomy.
Which was?
The 2016 ruling that granted full practice authority to APRNs, so nurse practitioners, midwives, CNSs within the VA system.
That means they can practice to the full extent of their education without physician supervision, but specifically inside the VA.
Exactly. And for those of you listening who want to lead these kinds of changes, the text closes by mentioning leadership development programs like the Robert Wood Johnson Health Policy Fellowship and the White House Fellowships.
So these are programs designed to train nurse leaders to work at the highest levels of government.
Precisely.
So we have covered the history, the definitions, the government structure, the laws, the strategy. If we synthesize Arvidsson's message in this chapter, what is the bottom line for the student listening?
The bottom line is that nurses have historically made a difference, and we must continue to do so. The text makes it crystal clear that to advocate for your patients effectively, you have to understand the legislative process. Policy isn't something that just happens to you. It's something you have the power and, I'd say, the professional obligation to shape.
So here is a final thought for you to take away based on the chapter's call to action. Take a moment, just go online and look up your state's legislative agenda. See what health bills are on the docket.
Or even just find out who your state legislator is.
Right. Save their contact info. Use that power of one that the text talks about. We hope this deep dive helps you navigate Chapter 10 and feel a little more confident about the engine room of healthcare.
From the Last Minute Lecture team, thank you for listening.
Good luck with your studies. We'll see you next time.